89.9 The Light, Lucy and Kel for breaking now. Earlier this week in a Melbourne court, you might have seen that the victim impact statements were delivered in the case of the mushroom chef. Erin Patterson, the woman convicted of fatally poisoning 3 people with death cap mushrooms. I was absolutely into this case. I followed it really closely. I was horrified. I do believe justice has been done, and I tell you what, reading the statements after they were made was really heavy. But there was one comment from Ian Wilkinson, who was the only survivor of that lunch, a comment that left me absolutely speechless, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. In fact, his comment has made headlines and has got so many people of faith, people not of faith, thinking about something. And to unpack this, we have our social commentator to the stars, Dave Adamson. He's been a journo, a pastor, theologian. He's the Aussie head of YouVersion, which is the Bible app on your phone, and he always brings a brilliant perspective. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, guys. How are you both doing?
Doing really well, and I'm so glad we get to chat to you about this. Yeah. Ian spoke at great length, and tell you what, it was apparently very hard for him to do so, and as you can imagine, very emotional, talking about the impact that the murders had on his life, losing his wife. He made a lot of his speech was a tribute to his beautiful wife, but there was a line in his statement which just floored me and floored many people. He encouraged Erin to receive his offer of forgiveness. And he said this at the very end of his impact statement. He said, "Now I am no longer Erin Patterson's victim, and she has become the victim of my kindness." And that's how he finished. He offered her forgiveness. And Dave, I just couldn't stop thinking about this. Everyone was talking about it on social media, in the press, that this man, who is a pastor, by the way, she tried to kill him, and he offered her forgiveness and said, "You can now be the victim of that forgiveness, that grace." Did that blow you away when you heard it, Dave?
Yeah, it did. It's one of those things, a lot of people don't realize that Ian is a Baptist pastor. And so to hear somebody say that, I mean, as you pointed out in the media, it's getting lots of headlines because, again, it's similar to the Abdullah case that we talked about last week, right? It's just this idea that forgiveness, that level of grace is so surprising in the modern world. And I think part of the reason it's surprising is as much as all of us wish that we would just naturally forgive, I think the reality is that most of us don't naturally drift towards forgiveness. We don't accidentally forgive people. We have to actually choose forgiveness. Grace is not something that comes just randomly or naturally to any of us. We have to forgive on purpose. And when we hear somebody do that in such an intentional way, especially in the face of such tragedy, it really catches us by surprise, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think why I keep thinking about this is we spoke to you a couple of weeks ago about forgiveness, and I was thinking about this is very, 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 very different. Forgiveness, for example, in the case of Danny and Layla Abdullah, whose children were killed by a man. Now, he was drunk, but it was accidental in some regard, by the fact he obviously knew what he was doing when he was drinking and driving. That was a different level of forgiveness. This is Ian staring a lady in the face in court who went out of her way to murder his wife and his friends and try to murder him. And that is so intentional, the level of planning, the callousness, the cold, the calculated side, for him to sit there and know all of that and go, "You wanted me to die, and yet I still offer you forgiveness." That is next level forgiveness.
Yeah, it's answering the same question. I think the same question is the same in both cases. What do you do when tragedy tries to crush you, when tragedy comes into your life? I mean, when the harm is accidental, forgiveness is about releasing the bitterness towards somebody who has recklessly destroyed your world. But when it's intentional, as in this case with Ian, the forgiveness feels so much harder because somebody chose to try to hurt you, to try to wound you. But in both cases, forgiveness doesn't erase the justice. It doesn't make what happened okay. But forgiveness in both cases, even though the intentional might be a little bit harder, the intentional incident, forgiveness will free your soul from carrying the crushing weight of that bitterness. I think of Ian and all the stuff that he went through. His wife, 2 of his close friends, all have been killed. But he has not let that bitterness come in and have the final word. He's chosen this really hard path. He's chosen this forgiveness. And that for me, that's not weakness. That's strength, because that's faith in action, right?
Yeah. And true, if he did lean into that place of bitterness, then she would win ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of people get stuck with forgiveness going, well, if I forgive, it means that it was fine and what she did was fine, or whatever happened was fine, or that it doesn't matter, or it's not important. But it's actually not that in any way, shape or form.
Yeah. Forgiveness doesn't take away the consequences of somebody's actions, and forgiveness doesn't erase your pain, but what it does is it lifts the weight of that pain. It lifts the weight of that bitterness. And here's the thing, Ian has every right to feel bitterness, right? But bitterness doesn't heal you.
No.
Forgiveness heals you in the middle of like unbelievable, deliberate harm. To be able to forgive in the middle of such an unimaginable loss, that starts to lift the weight of that bitterness off you. So it actually does more good for you than it might do for the person that you're forgiving. I imagine that Ian probably feels a lot lighter because of that. And it's not going to heal. It's not going to take away his pain. It's not going to take away the consequences of the actions that were done against him, but it's going to help heal him a little bit more. And I think we all experience that when we forgive other people. But it's so hard for us to do, especially when the act done against us is so deliberate. But what if we can learn from what Ian did? I mean, all of us, I think, can do something to learn, to take away something from Ian's words. What if you thought today or this week of the person that you might be holding bitterness against for whatever reason? What if you were to think of that person and then ask God to take the weight of that situation off you? It's not gonna take all the pain away, but it is one small step towards your own personal healing.
Such a great conversation to have, such a great thing to delve into for all of us in many ways, shapes and forms. There's probably a lot of unforgiveness floating around everybody's lives, and at a much lesser level than our partner being murdered by another family member. Ian Wilkinson is a hero. What a man of faith. What a man of character. We can learn so much from how he has carried himself and his powerful words. I'll repeat it because I think it's worth repeating one last time. He said, "My prayer for her is that she will use her time in jail wisely to become a better person. Now I am no longer Erin Patterson's victim, but she has become the victim of my kindness." Dave Adamson, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you again.